Ah, yes, the speeches, the tassels, the gowns, all of that. Today, the Electoral College will be casting ballots. Well, obviously, it's nothing like going to college and commencement addresses and anything like that. There's no baccalaureate. It is the Electoral College. Let's get a primer on what this is all about. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, is joining us. He's tweeting at DRB Rosenberg. Bill, welcome. Thanks for being on the show.
Good morning.
So it's not like when we get the old sheepskin when we graduate. This is a very different kind of college. It was put together in the Constitution. Why is it there?
Well, the reason for it is that the Founding Fathers had a certain degree of distress about the popular will of the people, and they wanted to have a safety valve to be able to let states override the public's vote if necessary. And as a result, they set up a system that had 2 senators vote. A number of delegates or electors equal to the 2 senators plus the number of representatives each state has to get to the total vote for the Electoral College. And in today's world, we need 270 Electoral College votes to win the presidency. And that's really what's playing out today. When you played that music, it reminded me a little bit also of the fact that a number of years ago I was asked by a television station to go to an electoral college voting in the state of Delaware. And it was kind of a very quiet, mundane ceremony where all of the electors were in the room. The slate of electors had already been chosen based upon the popular vote, and all they did was cast their ballots, put them in an envelope, and then they get mailed to Congress as is required by the Constitution to be opened in January to decide the winner.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, too, when you actually look at it, that you're voting for electors. I think it actually says that on some ballots. I'm not sure if it's the same way in every state, but regardless. I guess the question is, there's often been the expression used, faithless electors. What does that mean?
Well, the faithless electors issue is one in which people were chosen to be electors, and the way they're really chosen is based upon party loyalty or individual loyalty to the candidates running. And if the population in a state chooses, let's say, Joe Biden, all of Joe Biden's slate is supposed to go to the state capitol and cast their votes on the day of the Electoral College vote. The faithless electors issue is one in which someone that, let's say, might have been on either the Trump or the Biden slate decides that they don't really want to follow through on that, and they vote for someone else. And we've had a remarkably small number of faithless electors in our history. The biggest time we had a challenge to this was when Horace Greeley was running for president. He died in 1872 between the time of the election and the time of the Electoral College, and a number of electors, 63 of them, ended up not voting for Greeley. Makes sense because he can't be the president anyway. But the idea is that the only one that really got short-shifted is the candidate who lost the vote. He didn't have any impact on the election itself. It wouldn't have had any election on who was going to become vice president because Greeley was going to lose anyway. Most recently, we found in 2016 that there were 10 faithless electors, and the numbers of those electors was very small. It didn't make any difference in the outcome of an election, and those were largely sort of protest votes. But we don't really see it as an impactful situation, although it could be.
Yeah, and quite frankly, they're sort of, as you mentioned, these are party loyalists, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine that they would all of a sudden be persuaded to vote against whoever's representing their party.
Absolutely. You don't get to be an elector unless you're trusted by the campaigns in the party in each state. So the likelihood of a coup of some sort by faithless electors just isn't going to happen.
Now, those electoral college votes have to be certified in Congress, correct?
Right. So what happens is when those votes are taken in the states, they're put in an envelope and they're mailed to Washington. And on January 6th is when those ballots of the Electoral College are open. What's kind of interesting, particularly in 2020, but also in other past elections, is everyone's really impatient to see who won the election. They look at all the projections on the big screens, and they want to know who won that night. Well, we really don't know until we get to the point of the Electoral College count in January 6th, where we actually see the number of electors casting their ballots for one candidate or the other.
Dr. William Rosenberg, political science professor at Drexel University, joining us. Bill, can you help us understand a little better something that happened last week? We heard about Safe Harbor Day. What was that about?
Well, the idea here really goes back to, I guess, a little bit of a baseball analogy. When you look at a baseball game, throughout the game you see balls and strikes being called. And then, that determines whether or not a batter is out and how many outs you have in an inning and how many innings there are in a game. And then whether or not we use this analogy for electoral politics is that, people can challenge all portions of the electoral process. And they can go into state courts, they can go into federal courts, they can even go, as we see, to the Supreme Court. The idea about the Safe Harbor Day was that on December 8th, the Congress is required to count all the Electoral College votes for all states who had settled elections. And what we found on Safe Harbor Day is that basically all the states settled all the challenges that were out there. So this meant that it should have been, or it should be, a done deal when the Electoral College vote takes place. But we find that it really isn't. There are some people, including people like Representative Mo Brooks from Alabama, who wants to go out on the floor of the House and challenge the vote. And while the votes are supposed to count, it was built in as a safety valve. It really continues to be sort of an ongoing battle until we finally get to, I think, the Electoral College vote conclusion in January. But we have to realize that if one senator or one representative decides that they want to challenge the seating of a slate of electors, then each chamber has to go back into their own meeting and decide how to resolve this. The likelihood of this actually reversing anything is minuscule, but it does exist.
Last question. This has to do with just in general the Electoral College. As you mentioned in the beginning, there was a mistrust in some ways of the public sentiment, if you will. As a matter of fact, it was senators were elected by legislatures until the 1900s. So in the original Constitution, the founders had some thoughts about that. There was also a sense of this allowing representation of some of the smaller states so they wouldn't be swallowed up by the larger states, too. And evidently there's some talk about this was partly because of the slave states. In your opinion, I mean, is the Electoral College something that could be dispensed with, should be dispensed with? Where do you come down on that debate? Well,
there are actually a lot of issues that involve the election of the president. There is this National Interstate Compact that's being pressed by Robert Reich and others that says that states are going to, rather than change the Electoral College, make a state decision to say that whatever happens on the national popular vote will be how the Electoral College votes in that state will be cast. So it's not even necessarily the votes of that state, it's the national popular vote. So this is a way around using the Electoral College as it was originally intended. But there are also other proposals that are out there. Going to a straight popular vote is another one. Ultimately, the Electoral College serves as a backstop for something that one might consider only a rare possibility, the death of a presidential candidate, for example, between the election and the Electoral College vote. Or let's say Donald Trump would make good on his promise that I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and it wouldn't matter. That if that did happen, maybe it would matter to the Electoral College in terms of how they were going to make a decision. But one of the things that I would say is that we have to a certain extent, thank the Congress a number of years ago in our government by passing the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. So in the 20th Amendment to the Constitution, what they decided was that they were going to move the inauguration date from March till mid-January. And if we all think about that for just a little bit, this whole process, which seems to be dragging on for quite a while, without the 20th Amendment could possibly go all the way until March. So small presents we receive.
A gift of a lame duck from the from the people who were in charge of these things. Thank you, Bill Rosenberg. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for being on the show for the lesson.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll keep an eye on what happens today.
We will indeed. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, joining us to give us a sense of what this Electoral College thing is all about. He is tweeting a DR, as in doctor, at DRB Rosenberg, Rosenberg.